In the sprawling markets of Zirion Prime, where 1,000 alien species trade in flesh, metal, and dreams, nobody pays attention to one more human slave. Humans are common cargo, weak, short-lived, and profitable. The purple-skinned Vorthak who bought her assumed she was just another piece of livestock to work the crystal mines until she died. They never asked her full name. They should have. Because while the galaxy knows humans as a conquered species, there are some human names that still make entire star systems tremble. Names that belong to bloodlines who turned impossible into inevitable. Names that carry the genetic memory of a species that once looked at the endless void of space and said, "We'll take it all." The girl they chained in the mines carries one of those names. And, when word spreads through the galactic communication networks, when her identity reaches the right ears in the right places, the universe will remember why humanity didn't stay conquered for long. The Vorthak think they own her. They're about to learn that some things cannot be owned, cannot be broken, and should never, ever be underestimated. Her name is about to remind the galaxy of a simple truth: you can enslave a human's body, but you can never truly chain a human spirit. And, when that spirit belongs to the right bloodline, entire civilizations learn to fear what they've awakened. The crystal mines of Zirion Prime stretched deep into the planet's core, where the air tasted of metal and desperation. Bioluminescent fungi provided the only light in the tunnels, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow that made even the healthiest workers look sickly. The sound of pickaxes striking stone echoed endlessly through the corridors, a rhythmic symphony of suffering that never stopped. Maya Chan worked in Section 7, the deepest and most dangerous part of the mines. Her human hands, smaller than those of her alien overseers, were perfect for reaching into tight spaces where the most valuable crystals grew. The Vorthak had bought her 3 months ago from a slave trader on the Outer Rim, and, like all their human property, she was expected to work until her body gave out. The shackles around her ankles had rubbed raw wounds that never quite healed in the damp mine air. Her prison uniform, a drab gray fabric that all slaves wore, hung loose on her thin frame. The Vorthak fed their workers just enough to keep them alive and productive, nothing more. Maya had learned to ignore the constant ache of hunger, just as she'd learned to ignore the burning in her lungs from the toxic air. But, unlike the other slaves who moved through their days in broken resignation, Maya's dark eyes still burned with something the Vorthak hadn't been able to extinguish. She watched everything, learned everything, and, most importantly, she remembered everything. "Human! Move faster!" The voice of Overseer Grax boomed through the tunnel. The massive Vorthak stood nearly 8 feet tall, his purple skin covered in the ritual scars that marked his rank. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on his elongated skull, focused on Maya with the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of viewing other beings as property. Maya increased her pace, her pickaxe striking the crystal formation with practiced precision. Each strike was calculated, designed to extract the maximum amount of usable crystal while avoiding the gas pockets that could kill an entire work crew. She'd seen it happen before: slaves who worked too fast, too carelessly, only to rupture a pocket of toxic gas that would send bodies dropping like broken dolls. The crystal she was mining pulsed with an inner light, responding to the vibrations of her tool. These were resonance crystals, used in faster-than-light communication across the galaxy. Each piece she extracted was worth more than her life, at least according to Vorthak mathematics. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was mining the very technology that could carry word of her existence across the stars if only someone knew to look for her. "You work well for such a small creature," came a voice beside her. Maya glanced over to see Kelric, an elderly Zentari whose blue-gray skin had taken on an unhealthy pallor from years in the mines. His species was known for their longevity, and he'd been here longer than any other slave. "The Vorthak like you. That's dangerous." Maya continued working, not wanting to draw Grax's attention. "Why dangerous?" "Because when they like a slave's work, they keep that slave alive longer. And, the longer you stay in these mines, the more pieces of yourself you lose." Kelric's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many bright spirits dimmed to nothing. "I've watched hundreds of humans pass through here. The smart ones, the strong ones, the ones who think they can endure anything. The mines take them all eventually." "Maybe I'm different," Maya said quietly, her pickaxe never slowing. Kelric made a sound that might have been laughter if it wasn't so bitter. Child, I've been telling myself that for 60 years. Different doesn't matter down here. Only survival matters, and survival means becoming something less than what you were. Maya struck another crystal formation, sending sparks of light cascading down the tunnel wall. My grandmother used to tell me stories about humans who refused to become less. Humans who looked at impossible situations and found a way through them anyway. Stories. Kelrick's voice was dismissive. The Vorthak have been conquering worlds for 1,000 years. Your species lasted barely 2 centuries before falling to them. What makes humans special compared to the dozen other species working these tunnels? Before Maya could answer, the tunnel filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. Heavy, military-grade boots that belonged to Vorthak enforcers, not the softer shoes of overseers. Maya's hands tightened on her pickaxe as she recognized the pattern. When enforcers came to the deep tunnels, it usually meant someone was about to die. Captain Vex entered Section 7 flanked by 2 junior officers, their weapons visible and ready. Unlike Overseer Grax, whose scars were decorative, these Vorthak bore the marks of actual combat. Their armor was polished but functional, and their movements spoke of beings who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do so again. Which one is the human female designated as Property 7749? Captain Vex's voice carried the authority of someone used to instant obedience. Grax pointed at Maya without hesitation. This one, Captain. She's been productive, no behavioral issues. Is there a problem? Captain Vex approached Maya, his 4 eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You. What is your full designation name? Maya looked up from her work, meeting his gaze despite every instinct telling her to look away. Maya Chen. Chen, Captain Vex repeated the name slowly, as if tasting something unfamiliar. That is your family designation? It was my grandmother's name, Maya replied. And her grandmother's before that. One of the junior officers stepped forward, speaking in rapid Vorthak. Maya had picked up enough of their language during her months in captivity to understand fragments. The officer was saying something about communication intercepts, about certain names being flagged in their monitoring systems. Captain Vex's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Continue your work, he told Maya, but she caught something new in his voice. Was it uncertainty? Overseer Grax, accompany me. We need to discuss the slaves' processing records. As the Vorthak officials moved away to speak in hushed tones, Maya forced herself to continue mining. But her mind was racing. They were looking for something, and whatever it was had to do with her name. The way Captain Vex had reacted to Chin suggested it meant something to them, something important enough to bring military personnel into the mines. Kelrick had gone silent beside her, but she could feel his eyes on her back. Finally, he spoke in a whisper barely audible above the sound of their tools. What aren't you telling me, girl? Who exactly was your grandmother? Maya's pickaxe struck crystal, sending another shower of sparks into the dim tunnel. I don't know, she said honestly. My parents died when I was young. All I have are fragments of stories, pieces of a family history that never made complete sense. What kind of stories? Maya paused in her work, remembering. My grandmother used to say that the Chen family had a gift for seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. That we came from a line of explorers and strategists who helped humanity spread across the stars before the Vorthak conquest. She said our ancestors believed that every problem had a solution, every cage had a key, and every enemy had a weakness. Explorers and strategists, Kelrick repeated thoughtfully. Common enough claims. Half the humans in this galaxy claim their ancestors were heroes or leaders. Maybe. Maya resumed mining, but her voice carried a note of steel that hadn't been there before. But my grandmother also taught me to play a game called Go. She said the Chen family had been playing it for over 1,000 years, passing down strategies from generation to generation. She said the game taught us to think 50 moves ahead, to see victory in apparent defeat. A children's game? Not children's. Strategic. Every move creates a new pattern on the board, and every pattern reveals new possibilities. Maya's pickaxe found a particularly rich vein of crystal, the light pulsing in rhythm with her strikes. My grandmother said that humans who could see those patterns, who could think beyond the immediate moment, were the ones who survived when others didn't. Kelrick watched her work with new interest. And, you can see these patterns? Maya glanced toward where Captain Vex and Overseer Grax were still talking, their voices too low to hear but their body language tense with some kind of disagreement. I can see that something changed when I said my name. I can see that you're asking different questions now. And I can see that those Vorthak officers are afraid of something. Afraid? The Vorthak fear nothing. Everyone fears something, Maya said quietly. The question is finding out what. Before Kelrick could respond, the tunnel was filled with the sound of running footsteps. A breathless Vorthak messenger burst into Section 7, speaking rapidly to Captain Vex in their native language. Maya caught only pieces of the conversation, but the words she understood made her blood run cold. Communication intercept, confirmed identity, immediate priority, danger level red. Captain Vex's reaction was immediate and violent. He struck the messenger with the back of his hand, sending the smaller Vorthak sprawling. Then, he turned toward Maya, his face a mask of fury and something else, something that looked very much like fear. Overseer Grax, Captain Vex's voice was deadly quiet. Increase security around Property 7749 immediately. No communication with other slaves. No movement outside designated work areas. And, send word to command that we need confirmation of termination protocols for high-priority prisoners. Maya's hands never stopped moving, her pickaxe continuing its steady rhythm against the crystal formation, but, inside she felt something shifting. Whatever was happening, whatever her name meant to these alien captors, it was bigger than a simple slave registration error. The fear in Captain Vex's voice when he spoke of termination protocols told her that her life had just become exponentially more dangerous. But, it also told her something else, something her grandmother's stories had prepared her for even if she hadn't fully understood them until now. The Vorthak weren't just afraid of her, they were afraid of what she represented. And fear, as her ancestors had learned long ago, was a weapon that could be turned against those who wielded it. The game, Maya realized as she continued mining in the blue-green glow of the fungal lights, had just begun. And, despite the chains around her ankles and the guards at her back, she was starting to understand that she might not be as powerless as everyone believed. Her name was Chen, and, apparently, that still meant something in this galaxy. Now she just had to figure out what and how to use it. The crystals pulsed with captured light as her pickaxe struck them, each pulse like a heartbeat counting down to something inevitable. In the deep tunnels of Zirian Prime, where hope came to die, Maya Chen began to plan her first move in a game that would reshape the balance of power across the stars. The Vorthak had made their first mistake when they captured her. Their second mistake was thinking they could keep her. And their third, most crucial mistake, was believing that a human's worth could be measured by the strength of their chains rather than the fire that burned in their spirit. Maya continued to work, her movements steady and controlled, while inside her mind began mapping the patterns that would lead to freedom. The game board was vast, spanning star systems and species, but every game started with a single move. And Maya Chen was ready to play. The Galactic Communication Hub on Nexus Station processed trillions of messages every standard hour, its quantum processors sorting through diplomatic communications, trade negotiations, military dispatches, and personal correspondence across 12,000 inhabited worlds. The station itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, built in the neutral space between the major powers as a symbol of civilized discourse. In the depths of the station, where the most sensitive monitoring equipment hummed with constant activity, Senior Communications Analyst Thorn Valdris noticed something that made her six-fingered hands pause over her console. Valdris belonged to the Kythera, a species renowned for their ability to process vast amounts of information and identify meaningful patterns within apparent chaos. It was this talent that had earned her a position monitoring communications for potential security threats. The message that had caught her attention was routine enough, a standard prisoner identification query from the Vorthak mining operation on Zirian Prime. Such queries were common as slave-owning species checked their property against various databases. What made this particular query interesting was the automated response it had generated. Name, Chen, Maya. Species, human.
Status, Priority Alert Level 9.
Valdris had been monitoring galactic communications for over 30 years, and she had never seen a priority alert level 9 triggered by a human name. Level 9 alerts were reserved for war criminals, terrorist leaders, and heads of state. They were not triggered by slaves in mining operations. She pulled up the associated files, her pale blue eyes widening as she read. The Chen designation wasn't just flagged in one database, it appeared in security files maintained by 17 different species across the galaxy. Most of the entries were historical, dating back anywhere from 50 to 300 years. But they all carried the same warning classifications: extreme tactical threat,
unpredictable strategic capabilities, do not underestimate. Interesting reading?
The voice belonged to Director Cass, a veteran Altarian whose crystalline features reflected the light from Valdris's display screens. As head of the Communications Security Division, Cass had access to information that made most beings nervous simply knowing it existed. "Director, I've found something that doesn't make sense," Valdris said, highlighting the relevant data on her screen. "A human slave on Zirian Prime has triggered a level 9 alert, but the associated files are unusual."
Cass studied the information, her crystalline structure shifting color slightly as she processed the data. Among the Altarians, such color changes indicated deep concentration. "Chen," she said finally. "I know that name. From the security databases?" "No." Cass's colors shifted to a pattern that indicated troubled memories. "From personal experience.
40 years ago, I was part of the diplomatic mission that negotiated the surrender of the last human resistance fleet. The human admiral who sat across from us at that negotiation table was named Admiral Elena Chun."
Valdris felt a chill run through her system. "Admiral Chen of the final stand at Meridian?" "The same."
Cass's crystalline features darkened.
She was the one who turned what should have been a simple mop-up operation into a 3-year nightmare for the Vortak fleet.
Every time they thought they had her cornered, she would vanish, reappear somewhere else, and destroy twice as many ships as they'd expected to lose.
"But the humans lost that war," Valdris pointed out. "Admiral Chen surrendered in the end."
"She did," Cass agreed. "But not before she'd extracted a price that made the Vortak think twice about their expansion policies."
"Do you know what she told me during those negotiations?"
"She said that humans had a saying, 'You can kill the gardener, but the seeds are already planted.'"
"I never understood what she meant by that." Valdris turned back to her console, pulling up additional historical records.
"Director, according to these files, there have been 17 major incidents across the galaxy over the past 50 years where someone with the Chen designation played a crucial role. Look at this: the blockade of Centauri Gate, led by Captain Thomas Chen. The liberation of the Orion mining worlds, organized by Dr. Sarah Chen.
The merchant revolution on Kappa Sector, financed by the Chen Trading Consortium. "Show me the pattern analysis," Cass ordered. Valdris's fingers flew over her console, calling up a holographic display that showed the galaxy with highlighted points representing each incident.
As the data populated, a clear pattern emerged. Each event had occurred in a different sector, but they formed a rough spiral pattern moving outward from the former human core worlds.
"It's not random," Valdris breathed. "Someone's been coordinating this."
Look at the timing: each incident occurs just as local populations begin organizing resistance movements against their occupying forces. And, in every case, the Chen involved seems to appear from nowhere, with resources and knowledge they shouldn't have had access to.
Cass studied the display with growing alarm. "Pull up the incident reports.
I want to know what all these events had in common besides the name."
As Valdris compiled the data, a disturbing picture began to emerge. In each case, the Chen involved had demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to predict their enemies' movements.
They seemed to think several steps ahead of their opponents, turning seemingly hopeless situations into stunning victories or strategic withdrawals that preserved their forces for future operations. "Director," Valdris said, her voice tight with concern, "I think we're looking at evidence of a coordinated resistance network that's been operating under our noses for decades."
"And if this Maya Chen on Zirian Prime is part of it?" Then, the Vorthak have unknowingly captured someone whose disappearance will trigger responses they're not prepared for, Cass finished. Pull up the current Galactic Stability Index for that sector. The data that appeared made both beings pause. The Zirian sector was already showing signs of unrest. Labor disputes on 3 different worlds, shipping disruptions along major trade routes, and an unusual increase in communication traffic between previously unconnected resistance cells. All of it had begun approximately 3 months ago.
3 months, Valdris said. The same time frame as Maya Chen's capture.
Before Cass could respond, priority alerts began cascading across their screens. Communication intercepts from across the galaxy showed a sudden spike in coded transmissions. The encryption was unlike anything in their databases, but the pattern of distribution was clear. Messages were being passed from system to system, following the same spiral pattern they'd identified in the historical incidents.
They know, Cass said quietly. Whoever the Chen network is, they know one of their own has been captured. On Zirian Prime, 10,000 light-years away, the message traffic passing through the mining operations communication array had increased by 40% in the past 6 hours. Hidden within seemingly routine shipping manifests and trade invoices, coded instructions were being transmitted to sleeper agents who had been waiting years for activation. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a human xenobiologist who'd been working on Zirian Prime's agricultural research station for the past 5 years, paused in her analysis of soil samples as her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. To anyone monitoring the transmission, it appeared to be a routine update from her research coordinator on Terra Nova.
But, Dr.
Tanaka had been trained to recognize the subtle pattern variations that marked the message as something far more important. The decoded message was brief: garden coordinates confirmed. Prepare soil for immediate planting. Seeds arriving within 72 hours. Dr. Tanaka deleted the message and continued her work, but her mind was racing. She'd been placed on Zirian Prime as part of a deep cover operation that she'd hoped would never be activated. The garden reference meant someone from the primary Chen bloodline had been located. The rest of the code told her that a rescue operation was already in motion. She began making subtle adjustments to her research schedule, sending coded replies hidden in her daily reports. By the end of her shift, she'd confirmed that she had access to the mining complex's external sensor grid and could provide real-time intelligence on Vorthak security deployments. She'd also identified 3 other long-term assets in the system who could provide support.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Captain Elena Rodriguez was reviewing crew assignments aboard the merchant vessel Estrella del March. To the casual observer, Rodriguez was simply another human trader working the independent shipping lanes that connected the Outer Rim territories. Her cargo manifest listed standard trade goods, agricultural equipment, medical supplies, and luxury items for the growing colonies. What the manifest didn't show was that half her crew were former military personnel from a dozen different species, or that her ship's hidden compartments contained enough weapons and equipment to outfit a small army. The Estrella del Mar was one of 17 ships that formed the mobile command structure of an organization that officially didn't exist. Rodriguez's secure communicator activated with a priority signal she hadn't heard in over a decade. The message was simple: lost child found. Family reunion required. Coordinate with local assets for immediate extraction. She called her crew to battle stations, knowing that what appeared to be a routine rescue operation was likely to become something much larger. The Chen network had learned over the years that their enemies tended to use members of the bloodline as bait for elaborate traps. But they'd also learned that leaving one of their own in enemy hands was not an option. As the Estrella del Mar changed course toward the Zirian system, similar ships across the galaxy began converging on predetermined coordinates. Each vessel appeared to be engaged in routine commercial activities, but together they represented the largest mobilization of human assets since the end of the war 50 years earlier. Back on Nexus Station, Director Cass watched the communication patterns with growing alarm. The coded transmissions had evolved from simple message passing to what appeared to be full-scale operational coordination. Ship movements across multiple sectors were being synchronized, supply transfers were being arranged, and personnel were being repositioned. "How many people are we talking about?" she asked Valdris. "Based on the communication patterns?" Conservative estimate would be several thousand active operatives spread across 50 star systems, with support networks that could involve tens of thousands more.
Vuldrus's voice was strained.
Director, this isn't just a resistance network. This is a shadow government that's been operating parallel to our official galactic civilization for decades. Cass made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences.
Send a priority alert to all sector commands. Inform them that we've identified a significant security threat that requires immediate attention. And get me a direct channel to Vorthak High Command.
Are we warning them?
We're giving them the chance to release Maya Chen voluntarily before this situation escalates beyond anyone's ability to control it.
Cass's crystalline features had shifted to the deep red that indicated extreme concern.
Because if the historical pattern holds, what's about to happen on Zirion Prime is going to make their previous encounters with the Chun family look like minor disagreements. As priority transmissions raced across the galaxy, Maya Chen continued working in the crystal mines, unaware that her capture had triggered the largest covert operation in recent galactic history. But she could feel something changing in the air around her.
The Vorthak guards seemed more nervous, their patrols more frequent.
Overseer Grax had tripled the security around her work area, and she'd counted at least 6 new guards who carried the kind of heavy weapons usually reserved for military actions.
Whatever was coming, the Vorthak knew it was coming.
The question was whether they understood that their decision to enslave a Chen had just awakened something they were completely unprepared to face. Across the galaxy, humans who had been living quiet lives as teachers, traders, farmers, and researchers were receiving activation codes that called them back to their true purpose. The seeds, as Admiral Elena Chen had promised 40 years earlier, had indeed been planted.
And they were finally ready to bloom.
The emergency session of the Vorthak High Command convened in the war room deep beneath the surface of their capital world, Vorth Prime.
The chamber was a monument to military efficiency, its walls lined with tactical displays showing the deployment of their fleets across conquered territories.
For over 1,000 years, this room had been the nerve center of an empire that spanned 3 galactic arms and subjugated over 200 species. Supreme Admiral Krex stood at the center of the room, his massive frame casting shadows across the holographic displays.
Unlike the decorative scars worn by lower-ranking Vorthak, Krex's markings were earned through actual combat.
He was old enough to remember the human wars, old enough to have personally commanded fleets in the final battles that brought humanity to its knees. Explain to me, Krex said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power, how a single human slave has managed to trigger the largest security alert in our empire's recent history. Captain Vex, who had traveled from Zirion Prime at maximum warp, stood at attention before the assembled command staff. Despite his rank and combat experience, he felt dwarfed by the presence of beings who had conquered entire star systems. Supreme Admiral, the human designated as Property 7749 has been identified as Maya Chen.
Intelligence confirms she is a direct descendant of Admiral Elena Chen of the Human Resistance. A murmur passed through the assembled officers.
The name Elena Chen was still spoken in hushed tones among military circles, not with respect, but with the kind of wariness reserved for enemies who had proven unexpectedly dangerous.
Elena Chen has been dead for 30 years, Admiral ZYX interjected.
The elderly Vorthak's 4 eyes studied the tactical displays with the expertise of someone who had spent decades analyzing threats to the Empire. Her bloodline was supposedly extinct. Our post-war census accounted for all surviving members of prominent human families. Apparently, our census was incomplete, Captain Vex replied. Intelligence has confirmed that multiple individuals carrying the Chun designation have been involved in significant incidents across our territory over the past 50 years.
What we initially dismissed as coincidence now appears to be coordinated resistance activity.
Supreme Admiral Krex activated a holographic display showing the galactic spiral arm that contained most of their conquered territories. Red markers appeared across the display, each one representing a recorded incident involving someone named Shen. The pattern was unmistakable, a network of coordinated operations that had been hidden in plain sight for decades.
Show me the current threat assessment, Krex commanded.
Captain Vex activated his personal display, projecting intelligence reports gathered over the past 48 hours. Since Maya Chen's identification was confirmed, we've detected massive increases in encrypted communication traffic. Ship movements across multiple sectors are being coordinated.
We estimate that at least 20 vessels are converging on the Zirian system, ostensibly for commercial purposes.
What kind of vessels?
Admiral ZYX asked.
Merchant ships, research vessels, passenger transports. Nothing that appears militarily significant on its own. But, our analysis suggests many of these ships have been modified with military-grade equipment. Hidden weapon systems, enhanced shields, faster-than-light communication arrays that exceed civilian specifications.
Supreme Admiral Krex studied the data with growing concern.
The humans had been defeated 50 years ago, their military destroyed, their worlds occupied, their population scattered across the galaxy as laborers and servants. The idea that they had managed to maintain a functioning resistance network for 5 decades challenged everything the Vortak believed about their conquered subjects.
What are our defensive capabilities on Zirian Prime?
Krex asked. Standard mining security plus the garrison I requested after identifying Maya Chen, Captain Vex replied. Approximately 2,000 troops, 6 patrol cruisers, and defensive satellites around the primary mining facilities. Against an unknown number of potentially military-equipped vessels manned by humans who have spent 50 years planning for exactly this kind of operation, Admiral ZYX observed grimly.
What are our options?
The question hung in the air for a long moment.
Supreme Admiral Krex had built his career on decisive action, on the kind of overwhelming force that crushed resistance before it could take root. But, the situation on Zirian Prime presented complications that brute force couldn't necessarily solve.
We could execute the prisoner, suggested Admiral Thane, a younger officer whose aggressive tactics had earned him rapid promotion.
Remove the tactical asset they're trying to recover.
And trigger the largest human uprising since the original war, Admiral ZYX countered. If the Chen network is as extensive as our intelligence suggests, executing Maya Chen could destabilize dozens of systems. Then, we negotiate, Admiral Thane replied.
Offer to exchange the prisoner for guarantees that the resistance network will stand down.
Supreme Admiral Krex made a sound that might have been laughter if it wasn't so bitter.
You clearly never dealt with Elena Chen personally, Admiral.
I did.
Humans don't negotiate from positions of weakness, and they certainly don't abandon their own. Elena Chen once told me that humans have a saying, no one gets left behind.
I thought it was empty sentiment until I watched her sacrifice 3 cruisers to extract a single-stranded pilot. The tactical displays updated with new intelligence reports. More ships were moving toward the Zirian system, and coded transmissions were increasing across the galaxy. What had begun as a localized security issue was rapidly evolving into something much larger. Supreme Admiral, Captain Vex said hesitantly, there's something else. Our analysis of historical human resistance patterns suggests that Maya Chen's capture may have been deliberate. The room fell silent.
Explain, Krex commanded.
Maya Chen was captured from a refugee transport that was traveling an unusual route. Instead of taking the direct path from Terra Nova to the resettlement colonies, the transport had deviated significantly from standard shipping lanes.
It's possible they deliberately passed through an area where Vortak slavers were known to operate.
You're suggesting they wanted her to be captured? It would explain the speed and coordination of the response. If they had advanced knowledge of her capture, they could have begun mobilizing assets immediately. Captain Vex activated another display showing communication patterns. The timing is too precise for a spontaneous response.
This has all the hallmarks of a carefully planned operation. Admiral ZYX's scarred features shifted into what passed for a Vortak expression of alarm. If Maya Chen's capture was intentional, then we're not dealing with a rescue operation.
We're dealing with something designed to draw our forces into a prepared battlefield.
The implications were staggering.
If the human resistance had deliberately sacrificed one of their own as bait for a larger operation, it suggested a level of strategic thinking and long-term planning that the Vortak had never anticipated from their conquered subjects.
What would be the strategic value of Zirian Prime? Supreme Admiral Krex asked.
Zirian Prime processes approximately 15% of the resonance crystals used in our communication network, Admiral ZYX replied after consulting his tactical database. More importantly, it's a central hub for shipping routes that connect 12 different systems. Control of Zirion Prime would give the Resistance a stranglehold on commerce and communication across an entire sector. And if they've been planning this operation for months or years, they would have had time to position assets throughout the system, Captain Vex added.
Sleeper agents, hidden weapon caches, compromised security personnel. By the time we realize we're under attack, they could control key installations.
Supreme Admiral Krex made his decision.
Admiral Thane dispatched the 3rd Battle Fleet to Zirion Prime immediately. Full combat deployment, not peacekeeping operations. If the humans want a battle, we'll give them one they won't survive. What about Maya Chen? Captain Vex asked.
She remains a valuable asset until we understand the full scope of this operation. Increase security around her, but keep her alive.
If this is a rescue mission, she's our only leverage.
If it's something else, she might be our only source of information about what we're really facing.
As the Vortak High Command began implementing their response, the first human ships had already entered the outer edge of the Zirion system.
The merchant vessel Estrella del Mar dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a small asteroid cluster, ostensibly to conduct routine maintenance on their navigation systems. Captain Elena Rodriguez studied the passive sensor readings on her command display. The Vortak had responded exactly as predicted, reinforcing their position around Zirion Prime with additional ships and troops. What they didn't realize was that the human plan didn't require getting close to the planet.
Status report, Rodriguez commanded.
All ships have reached their designated coordinates, her tactical officer reported.
Commander Sarah Kim was one of the few veterans who remembered serving under the original Elena Chen.
The mining operation is showing standard security protocols, but we're detecting significantly increased guard presence around the deep mining sections.
That confirms Maya's location. What about our assets on the surface? Dr. Tanaka has confirmed that she can provide real-time intelligence on Vortak security deployments.
The other sleeper agents are in position to support the operation, but they're requesting clarification on the mission parameters.
Captain Rodriguez smiled grimly.
Tell them they're about to learn why the Vortak should have studied human history more carefully before they decided to enslave one of us. She activated the ship's communication array, sending a coded transmission that would reach every human vessel in the system.
The message was simple: this is Admiral Chen. Begin Operation Tsunami. The name she used wasn't technically accurate. Rodriguez held the rank of captain in the underground human navy that officially didn't exist.
But Elena Chen had been more than an admiral, she had become a symbol of human resistance. And, in the tradition of that resistance, her name and her legacy belonged to anyone willing to carry them forward.
Deep in the crystal mines of Zirion Prime, Maya Chen felt the subtle vibration of mining equipment shutting down in distant tunnels.
The rhythm of the work that had defined every day for 3 months was beginning to change. She couldn't hear the coded transmissions racing through space above her, couldn't see the ships taking position in the darkness between worlds. But she could feel something shifting, like the moment before a storm when the air becomes electric with possibility. Her grandmother's stories had taught her to recognize that feeling, to understand that it meant the impossible was about to become inevitable. The Vortak guards around her seemed more nervous, their weapons held ready, their attention split between watching her and monitoring their communication devices. Captain Vex had returned from his mysterious trip off-world with additional security protocols and an expression that suggested he was expecting trouble. Maya continued her work, her pickaxe striking the crystal formations with steady precision. Each strike sent light pulsing through the crystals, like a heartbeat counting down to something momentous. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel it approaching with the certainty of sunrise. Somewhere above her, the first phase of a plan 50 years in the making was beginning to unfold. The Vortak were about to learn that enslaving a human was easy. Keeping them enslaved, especially when that human carried a name that had become legend, was about to prove much more difficult. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came at 0347 Standard Galactic Time, when the primary communication array serving the Zirion system went silent. Not damaged, not jammed, simply silent, as if someone had thrown a switch and cut all faster-than-light communication with the outside galaxy. Supreme Admiral Krex received the news aboard his flagship, the Dominator, still 3 hours from the Zirian system at maximum warp. The massive dreadnought shuddered slightly as its engines pushed beyond safe operational parameters, racing toward what was increasingly looking like a trap that had been decades in the making.
How is a total communication blackout possible? Krex demanded of his communications officer. Unknown, sir.
The array was functioning normally, then, all signals ceased simultaneously. It's not equipment failure, the power signatures suggest the array is still operational, but it's not transmitting on any frequency we can detect.
Admiral ZYX studied the tactical displays with growing alarm.
If they've found a way to control our communication infrastructure without destroying it, they can monitor our transmissions while blocking our ability to coordinate with other systems.
Meaning they know exactly what reinforcements we're sending and, when they'll arrive, Krex concluded grimly. What's the status of Captain Vex's forces on Zirian Prime? Unknown, sir.
All communication with the surface has been cut off. On the surface of Zirian Prime, Captain Vex was discovering just how thoroughly the human resistance had prepared for this moment. The communication blackout had been followed by a series of precisely timed power failures that disabled security sensors across the mining complex. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through corridors that had become maze-like in the sudden darkness.
Report! Vex barked at his communications officer. All external communications down, sir. Internal communications are operating on emergency power only.
We're essentially blind beyond the immediate facility.
What about the prisoner? Section 7 is secure, sir.
Triple guard rotation as ordered. But, even as the words were spoken, Vex could hear the sound of weapon fire echoing through the distant tunnels. Not the heavy, distinctive sound of Vorthak military weapons, but the sharp crack of projectile firearms that suggested human resistance fighters were already inside the facility. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had spent 5 years studying the Agricultural Research Station's layouts, but those same blueprints had given her detailed knowledge of the underground tunnel systems that connected the farming facilities to the mining complex. When Operation Tsunami began, she'd activated a dozen sleeper agents who had been positioned throughout the Zirian Prime infrastructure over the past several years. The power failures hadn't been caused by human sabotage, they'd been caused by human engineers who had spent years slowly modifying the planet's electrical grid to respond to specific command codes. The security sensor failures hadn't been the result of external attack, they'd been programmed by human technicians who had been working maintenance shifts for months, installing carefully hidden overrides in systems their Vorthak supervisors barely understood. Phase 1 complete, Dr. Tanaka reported via encrypted communicator to the ships waiting in the darkness above.
All primary infrastructure targets are under our control. Beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 involved the systematic liberation of every human slave in the mining complex, along with any non-humans willing to join the resistance.
This wasn't a rescue operation designed to extract a single high-value prisoner, this was the opening move in a campaign to free every enslaved being on Zirian Prime. Maya-chan heard the weapon fire growing closer and felt a change in the air pressure that suggested major structural modifications were taking place somewhere in the tunnel system. The Vorthak guards around her had gone from nervous to panicked, their communication devices producing only static. "Overseer Grax," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet that had fallen over Section 7.
"You might want to consider releasing the prisoners and evacuating your people."
Grax whirled toward her, his 4 eyes blazing with fury and fear.
"You know something about this."
"I know that my grandmother told me stories about what happens when humans decide they've had enough of being pushed around," Maya replied calmly, continuing to work her pickaxe against the crystal formation. "She said that humans have a gift for turning impossible situations to their advantage. You're a slave. You have no power here."
Maya struck another crystal, sending light cascading through the tunnel. "Power isn't something you have, Overseer. It's something you take."
Before Grax could respond, the tunnel was filled with the sound of approaching footsteps, not the heavy boots of Vorthak reinforcements, but the lighter, more varied footfalls of multiple species moving with military precision. Emergency lighting flickered and stabilized, revealing figures in improvised combat gear approaching from 3 different tunnel entrances. The leader was a human woman in her 40s, carrying equipment that marked her as either a very well-supplied civilian or a military professional operating under deep cover. Behind her came a mixed group of humans and aliens, all armed, all moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of extensive training. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the woman said, introducing herself to Maya while keeping her weapon trained on the Vortak guards.
"We're here to get you out. I'm Maya Chun."
"We know exactly who you are," Dr. Tanaka replied.
"The question is whether you're ready to find out what that name really means."
Overseer Grax made the mistake of reaching for his weapon. The response from the rescue team was instantaneous and devastating, not lethal, but certainly incapacitating. Within seconds, every Vortak guard in Section 7 was unconscious, and Maya found herself looking at the first friendly faces she'd seen in 3 months. "The shackles," Maya said, gesturing to the restraints around her ankles. Dr. Tanaka produced a small device that dissolved the metal locks with a brief application of what appeared to be concentrated acid. "Family heirloom," she explained with a slight smile. "Your grandmother designed the first version during the original resistance." As Maya stood free for the first time in months, she felt something awakening inside her that went beyond simple relief. It was the same feeling she'd experienced while playing Go with her grandmother, the moment when all the seemingly random pieces on the board suddenly revealed their true pattern. "How many people are involved in this operation?" she asked.
"On Zirian Prime?"
"About 200 active operatives, plus several thousand civilians who will support the resistance once we've secured the primary objectives," Dr. Tanaka replied.
"In space?" 17 ships carrying approximately 3,000 personnel. "And the Vortak response?"
"They're sending the third battle fleet. Approximately 50 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts.
They'll arrive in about 2 hours." Maya absorbed this information with the same analytical calm she'd applied to her grandmother's strategic lessons.
17 human ships against 50 Vortak vessels seemed like hopeless odds, but she was beginning to understand that the operation she'd stumbled into wasn't designed to win through superior firepower.
"This isn't a rescue mission," she said. "It's a demonstration." Dr. Tanaka nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother would be proud." "Yes, Maya, this is a demonstration."
For 50 years, the galaxy has believed that humans are a broken species, scattered and defeated. Today, we're going to remind them what we're actually capable of when we put our minds to something. As they moved through the tunnel system toward the surface, Maya began to see the scope of the operation that had been triggered by her capture. Every corridor they passed contained evidence of careful preparation, hidden supply caches, modified equipment, secret passages that had been carved over months of patient work. The entire mining complex had been gradually converted into a fortress, and the Vortak had never noticed.
"How long have you been planning this?" Maya asked.
47 years, Dr. Tanaka replied. "Ever since your grandmother made us promise that humanity would never again allow one of our own to remain in captivity." They reached the surface through a maintenance access that emerged near the Agricultural Research Station. The night sky above Zirian Prime was lit with the glow of fires burning across the mining complex, but Maya could see that the destruction was carefully controlled. Buildings that housed slaves were intact and protected, while Vortak administrative and security facilities burned.
"Status report," Dr. Tanaka called to a human technician monitoring communication equipment. "All primary objectives secured. We've liberated approximately 4,000 slaves of various species. Vortak military forces have been neutralized or contained. And Captain Rodriguez reports that the fleet engagement is about to begin."
Maya looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere above them, human ships were preparing to face impossible odds against the Vortak battle fleet.
"What's the plan for the space battle?"
Dr. Tanaka smiled, and Maya caught a glimpse of the steel that had sustained the human resistance for 50 years. "The same plan your grandmother used at the Battle of Meridian. Make them pay such a high price for victory that they'll think twice before attacking us again." In the darkness between worlds, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the Vortak Third Battle Fleet drop out of faster-than-light travel exactly where human intelligence had predicted they would. The massive ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for what their commanders expected to be a simple suppression of a slave revolt. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, Rodriguez broadcast on the encrypted frequency that connected the human vessels.
Remember, we're not here to win a conventional battle.
We're here to prove that humanity is not beaten, not broken, and not going away.
The Vortak fleet had 50 ships. The humans had 17.
But the humans had spent 50 years studying Vortak tactics, 50 years analyzing their weaknesses, and 50 years preparing for exactly this kind of engagement. What they lacked in firepower, they would make up for in cunning, courage, and the kind of strategic thinking that had once carried humanity to the stars. Supreme Admiral Krex studied the tactical displays as his fleet approached the small human force. From a purely military perspective, the outcome was predetermined. But something about the human formation troubled him. They weren't positioned defensively around the planet, as logic dictated. Instead, they were spread throughout the system in a pattern that made no tactical sense.
"Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "the human ships are broadcasting a message on all frequencies. Put it through."
The voice that filled the Dominator's command center was female, confident, and carried an accent that marked the speaker as coming from the original human homeworlds.
"This is Admiral Elena Chen, commanding the Free Human Fleet. Supreme Admiral Krex, I believe we have something that belongs to you." The main display activated, showing the interior of one of the human ships.
Maya Chen stood in what appeared to be the vessel's command center, no longer wearing the gray uniform of a slave but dressed in the blue and silver of the human resistance. Beside her stood an older woman whose bearing and presence immediately marked her as a veteran military officer. "Maya Chen has been recovered," the woman continued. "In the process, we've also liberated every enslaved being on Zirian Prime and taken control of the planet's strategic infrastructure.
We're prepared to return control to you under the following conditions."
Supreme Admiral Krex felt a cold certainty settle in his mind. He was looking at a trap that had been 50 years in the making, and he was already too deep inside it to escape without paying a terrible price.
"What are your demands?" he asked.
"Formal recognition of the Free Human Republic as a sovereign government.
Immediate cessation of human enslavement throughout Vortak territory.
And reparations for 50 years of crimes against our people."
"Impossible."
"Then, we'll demonstrate why it's actually inevitable," Maya Chen said, stepping forward to address the camera directly.
"My name is Maya Chen.
I carry the bloodline of explorers who turned the impossible into the inevitable. And I'm here to remind you of something my grandmother tried to teach you 50 years ago." She paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of generations of human determination. "You can enslave our bodies, but you can never truly chain our spirits. And when those spirits belong to a species that once looked at the endless void of space and decided to make it our home, you should be very careful about what you wake up when you push us too far." The transmission ended, leaving Supreme Admiral Krex staring at a tactical situation that was about to become the most expensive lesson in human psychology that his empire had ever received. The Battle of Zirian Prime began not with the thunderous exchange of capital ship weapons, but with a demonstration of strategic thinking that would be studied in military academies for generations. Supreme Admiral Krex ordered his fleet to advance in standard formation, expecting the human ships to either flee or make a desperate defensive stand around the planet. Instead, the human vessels simply vanished.
"Report!"
Krex barked at his sensor operator.
"All 17 human ships have activated some form of stealth technology, sir.
We're detecting no energy signatures, no gravitational anomalies, nothing. They're completely invisible to our sensors."
Admiral ZYX studied the tactical display with growing unease. "How is that possible?"
"Our intelligence indicated that human ships were using standard commercial technology."
"Apparently our intelligence was incomplete," Krex replied grimly.
He was beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about the human resistance was based on deliberate misinformation.
"Begin wide-spectrum scanning. They can't have just disappeared."
But the humans had done exactly that, using technology that the Vortak didn't know existed. 50 years of research conducted in hidden laboratories scattered across the galaxy had finally produced breakthroughs that would level the playing field between human cunning and Vortak firepower. Aboard the Estrella del Mar, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched her tactical display as the Vortac fleet spread out in search formation. The stealth generators were working perfectly, rendering her ship invisible to conventional sensors while allowing her to monitor every movement of the enemy fleet. All ships maintain stealth protocols, she broadcast on the quantum encrypted frequency that connected the human vessels. Wait for the Vortac to reach optimal positioning, then execute Gamma Protocol. Maya Chen stood beside the captain, watching the battle unfold with fascination and growing understanding. This isn't about defeating their fleet, she observed. It's about proving that human technology has advanced beyond their expectations. Exactly, Captain Rodriguez replied. For 50 years, we've allowed the galaxy to believe that humanity was technologically stagnant, dependent on Vortac infrastructure for everything from communication to transportation. Today, we reveal that we've been building our own capabilities while they weren't paying attention. On the command deck of the Dominator, Supreme Admiral Krex was discovering just how thoroughly the humans had deceived galactic intelligence. His fleet was now spread across the entire Zirian system, searching for an enemy that remained completely invisible while somehow maintaining perfect coordination among their own forces. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're detecting massive power surges throughout the system. Something is charging weapons systems, but we can't identify the sources. Impossible. Our sensors should detect any power generation significant enough to charge ship weapons. Sir, I think the power sources aren't on ships. Before Krex could process the implications of that statement, the first phase of Gamma Protocol began. The asteroids scattered throughout the Zirian system, which had appeared to be standard space debris, suddenly revealed themselves to be camouflaged weapons platforms. 50 years of patient preparation had converted the entire system into a fortress, and the Vortac fleet was now flying through the middle of it. The initial volley from the hidden platforms was devastating, not because of its destructive power, but because of its precision. Instead of attempting to destroy Vortac ships, the human weapons targeted specific systems, communication arrays, sensor networks, and propulsion systems. Within minutes, the proud Third Battle Fleet found itself deaf, blind, and unable to coordinate their response. Damage report. Krex commanded. 17 ships with disabled communications, 12 with compromised sensor systems, 8 with engine damage. No hull breaches, no casualties. They're not trying to destroy us, sir. They're trying to disable us. Admiral ZYX understood the implications immediately. They're demonstrating restraint while proving they could destroy us if they chose to. This isn't a battle, it's a negotiation conducted with military force. The second phase of Gamma Protocol revealed another technological surprise. The human ships decloaked simultaneously, but not in the positions the Vortac expected. Instead of being scattered throughout the system, all 17 vessels had somehow moved to a single location, directly above Zirian Prime, in a perfect defensive formation that would require the Vortac to fight through overlapping fields of fire to reach the planet. How did they move 17 ships without us detecting any engine signatures? Krex demanded. Unknown, sir. It's as if they teleported. But the humans hadn't teleported, they had simply mastered a form of faster-than-light travel that produced no detectable energy signature. Another breakthrough that 50 years of secret research had finally achieved, another technological advantage that the galaxy hadn't suspected humanity possessed. Maya Chen watched the tactical display as the Vortac fleet began regrouping, their commanders clearly struggling to adapt to a situation that defied all their assumptions about human capabilities. They're learning that the species they conquered 50 years ago isn't the same species they're facing today, she observed. Humanity never stops learning, never stops adapting, Captain Rodriguez replied. Your grandmother understood that. She knew that defeat was only temporary if we refused to accept it as permanent. The third phase of Gamma Protocol was the most audacious. Instead of waiting for the Vortac to attack, the human fleet went on the offensive, but not in any way the Vortac could have anticipated. Using their stealth technology and superior maneuverability, human ships began appearing throughout the Vortac formation, not to attack, but to broadcast. Every Vortac ship in the fleet suddenly found their communication systems overridden by human transmissions. Not propaganda or demands for surrender, but something far more disturbing: detailed intelligence briefings that demonstrated just how thoroughly the human resistance had penetrated Vorthack society.
"This is Admiral Chen," Maya's voice announced simultaneously aboard every Vorthack vessel.
"For the past 50 years, humans have been working as laborers, servants, and slaves throughout your empire. What you didn't realize is that some of those humans were also working as intelligence operatives, gathering information about your technology, your tactics, and your weaknesses." The broadcasts began displaying classified Vorthack military information, fleet dispositions, strategic plans, even personal files on senior officers. Information that should have been impossible for humans to access, displayed with casual ease that suggested the resistance had been reading Vorthack mail for decades. Supreme Admiral Krex felt a cold realization settle over him. The humans weren't just demonstrating superior technology, they were revealing that his empire had been compromised at every level for generations. Every strategic plan, every military deployment, every confidential communication had potentially been monitored by human intelligence.
"How long have they been watching us?" Admiral ZYX asked quietly.
"Probably since the day we conquered them," Krex replied. "The question is what they plan to do with what they've learned."
The answer came in the fourth phase of Gamma Protocol.
Human ships throughout the galaxy, vessels that had been operating as innocent merchant traders and research platforms for decades, suddenly revealed their true nature. Weapons systems that had been hidden in cargo holds deployed, military personnel who had been posing as civilian crews assumed their real identities, and a fleet of over 200 human vessels announced their presence across 12 different star systems. The message was clear: the human resistance wasn't limited to the 17 ships at Zirion Prime. It was a galaxy-spanning network with resources and capabilities that the Vorthack had never suspected. The defeated human species had been rebuilding their strength for 50 years, and today was the first time they were showing what they had accomplished. On Zirion Prime, Dr. Yuki Tanaka coordinated the liberation of the remaining slave populations while monitoring the space battle above. The freed slaves included not just humans, but representatives of dozens of species that had been conquered by the Vorthack over the centuries. All of them were seeing their supposed masters being systematically outmaneuvered by the humans they had dismissed as weak and broken. Dr. Tanaka, one of the freed Zentari slaves, approached her with obvious confusion.
"What happens now?"
"The Vorthack will send more fleets, more troops.
This victory cannot last."
"That's where you're wrong," Dr. Tanaka replied, gesturing toward the tactical displays that showed human ships revealing themselves across the galaxy.
"This isn't about winning one battle. It's about changing the fundamental balance of power in this galaxy."
The final phase of Gamma Protocol was the most devastating, not because of its military impact, but because of its psychological effect. Maya Chen, broadcasting from the command deck of the Estrella del Mar, addressed not just the Vorthack fleet but the entire galaxy. "My name is Maya Chen," she began, "and I represent the Free Human Republic, a government that has been operating in shadow for 50 years while preparing for this moment. Today, we announce our existence to the galaxy and our intention to reclaim our rightful place among the starfaring civilizations." She paused, allowing her words to be transmitted across thousands of worlds where humans worked as slaves and servants, where other conquered species struggled under Vorthack rule, and where independent governments watched nervously as the balance of galactic power shifted. For 50 years, the galaxy has believed that humans were a broken species, dependent on our conquerors for survival. Today, we reveal the truth: we have been gathering strength, developing technology, and building alliances while our enemies believed we were simply accepting our fate. The broadcasts began showing human technological achievements that had been hidden for decades: ships capable of faster-than-light travel without detectable energy signatures, weapons that could disable enemy systems without causing casualties, sensor technology that could penetrate any known stealth system, and, most importantly, evidence of human colonies in previously unknown star systems.
"We are not asking for our freedom," Maya continued. "We are announcing that we have already taken it.
The question now is whether the Vorthack Empire wishes to begin negotiations for a peaceful coexistence, or whether they prefer to discover just how much damage a truly motivated human resistance can inflict on their infrastructure."
Supreme Admiral Krex stared at the tactical displays showing the scope of the human revelation.
Over 200 ships, advanced technology that exceeded anything in the Vorthack arsenal, and evidence of secret colonies that suggested the human population was much larger than anyone had realized. The humans had spent 50 years playing a game that the Vorthack never realized they were part of. Every human slave, every servant, every apparently defeated refugee had potentially been a piece on a board that stretched across the entire galaxy. And, now, in a single coordinated revelation, they had demonstrated that the game had already been won.
"Open a channel to the human fleet," Krex commanded.
"Sir?"
"You heard me. Open a channel."
When the connection was established, Krex found himself looking at Maya Chen, who stood with the confidence of someone representing a power that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. "What are your terms?" he asked.
"Immediate recognition of the Free Human Republic as a sovereign government. Complete cessation of human enslavement throughout all territories.
Reparations for 50 years of crimes against our people.
And the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between our governments." "And if we refuse?"
Maya's smile was reminiscent of her grandmother's expression during the original surrender negotiations, the look of someone who held all the advantages and knew it. "Then, you'll discover that the past 50 years of peaceful occupation were actually humanity's way of being polite."
"We've been inside your empire for half a century, Supreme Admiral.
"We know where every military base is located, where every strategic resource is stored, and how every critical system operates. If you prefer war to diplomacy, we're prepared to show you just how vulnerable an empire becomes when it's been infiltrated by people it never bothered to watch carefully." The threat was delivered with calm professionalism, but its implications were staggering. The humans weren't just offering terms for surrender, they were negotiating from a position of overwhelming strategic advantage that they had been building for decades while their enemies remained oblivious.
Supreme Admiral Krex made the decision that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy.
"I'll need to consult with the High Command, but I believe we can find terms acceptable to both governments."
Maya nodded graciously.
"We'll be happy to wait for your response, Supreme Admiral. After all, we've been patient for 50 years. A few more days won't make any difference." As the transmission ended, Krex realized that he had just witnessed the most sophisticated long-term strategy in military history. The humans had allowed themselves to be conquered, then spent 50 years infiltrating their conquerors while building the strength to reclaim their independence. They had turned defeat into the foundation of ultimate victory. The Battle of Zirion Prime was over. The war for human freedom had just begun. But everyone involved understood that the outcome was no longer in doubt. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their military prowess. It was their refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. And Maya Chen, standing on the command deck of a human ship in a galaxy that was finally beginning to respect her people again, understood that she carried more than just her grandmother's name. She carried the legacy of a species that had looked at the endless void of space and decided to make it their home, and who would never, ever accept being told that they didn't belong among the stars.
The game was won.
Now came the harder task of building a peace that would ensure it never had to be played again.